Okay, on to the Diagnose tab. This tab is basically telling you what the Cortex is doing. It allows you to see software visually on the GUI, what the Cortex is outputting, and what it sees input-wise from your radio. So as we come over here, we can see the receiving channels box. This tells us what channels we're receiving. So first off, this is receiving. The light is green, telling us that we have a connection and is receiving from the receiver. A, B, C, and D are lit. If you recall from the very first video where I showed how I had the Cortex hooked up, it's plugged into a 6-channel receiver with port E not being plugged in. So that's the reason why A, B, C, and D are lit. The Gyro Channel, that is the aux channel. That is the channel you use to control the Cortex mode, the gray wire. As you can see, it's plugged in and it shows that it's lit and it's receiving a signal. Here we have the state of operation box. This will light up depending on what it's doing. So for example, if I were to turn the Cortex off here, turn the Cortex back on, you'll see it says startup self-test. Then it jumps to operation. If you see the waiting for RC light, the receive channels will not be lit and it's waiting for the RC signal to come on, the radio signal from your transmitter. The setup, I don't know how you would ever see this lit due to the fact that for you to connect to the computer, you are using the same port that you plug the jumper into to have the Cortex enter into a setup mode. Then you have operation, and then you have failed self-test. An example of where it would fail self-test is if you powered on the Cortex and you didn't keep it still, it would have failed its self-test. Let me demonstrate that here. As you saw, I powered it up and I moved the Cortex. It came down here and it said the failed self-test. It gave you a code and it said no standstill, basically saying the Cortex wasn't still. Here in the bank active box, this tells us which bank is currently active. Bank 1 or bank 2. Let me move the switch. This is the middle position, so the Cortex is off. And this is the other position, so the Cortex is now in bank 1. In factory default settings, bank 1 is rate mode, bank 2 is hold mode. Bank 1 is indicated by an amber LED, bank 2 is indicated by the green LED. The Cortex off is indicated by the red LED. Here we can see the stabilization active box. This tells us when the Cortex is in bank 1 or bank 2, which axes are currently being stabilized. If you go into the software and you chose to not set up one of the axes, or you don't want it to be stabilized, like you turned it off, which I'll show you later as we go into the software, some of these may not be lit. Setup done for access box. This tells you which axes has the setup done on them. An example of where you would see one of these not lit is if you were doing a flying wing. On a flying wing, you have elevons, and on the elevons, you move the aileron and elevator, and there's no rudder. So you wouldn't do that in the setup. So this wouldn't be lit green here. And then channels as received. This shows us how the Cortex sees the channels as it's receiving. So if I move my ailerons, I can see B and D have movement. If I move my elevator, channel A is receiving movement. And if I move my rudder, channel C is seeing the movement. Again, I don't have an E because I only used a 6-channel receiver. And the throttle and throttle 2 spare outputs, you won't see these move unless you're using PPM, S-Bus, or JR SAT. And then here we have the actual indicated value of the switch that controls the Cortex mode. And the green box here telling us that the PC connection is okay. So the next video is going to be the options tab.